Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to do a pre-trip on a school bus that has air brakes. First you come around, open up the door, and then go inside the bus. Before you do, check your stepwell tread, make sure it's in good condition and that nothing's going to cause a passenger to slip and fall. And then go ahead and close your door if you want. Next thing, you go ahead and insert the key, turn it to the left, and then you grab your Zonar wand. Now in case your Zonar wand does not work, you will want to look for your paper pre-trip book and do a manual pre-trip. So then, what you want to do is check for your first aid kit, body fluid cleanup kit, fire extinguisher, warning triangles. You also want to check for your registration and insurance information. On this bus, it's located in this door. Bulkhead lettering, child checkmate, theft mate, EP2, and then your DVR for your cameras is in the back. Check and make sure your cameras are not cracked, broken, or missing. Then you want to check your defroster fans, kitty mirror, and sun visor. Make sure all these items underneath the bulkhead are secured in place, not cracked, broken, or missing. Check your driver's seat, make sure it's not loose or floppy. Seat belt, make sure it's intact, it's not cut or torn or missing. Check for your seat belt cutter. Check your steering wheel, make sure there's no excessive play. Check your horn. And then you want to check your handrails, make sure they're secured. And lastly, you want to make sure that your window opens and closes. Make sure there's nothing that will prevent it from opening or closing. All right, moving on. Scan your switch panel tag wherever that might be. It's in a different location depending on the bus. Check your defroster fans, low and high, heaters, low and high. Heated mirror, dome lights. So that's for the inside of the bus. Those are working. Driver dome. Noise kill. So what you do here is turn on some heaters. Flip that on. And then you also have your warning light master. Then your flasher light initiator. You want to check that, make sure the 8-ways come on. On this bus, it's wired in so that those only come on when the ignition's turned on. So we're going to turn that on. Go ahead and turn on the master switch, flash your light. I can see that my ambers are flashing. Open up the door, red should come on.
Child checkmate is now activated.
And then they should go off when you close the door. And then strobe light. Next, you want to move your way to the back of the bus. Bang on the back of each seat. Make sure none of them are loose. And as always, you want to remove your empty sign before you start to drive. Make sure that lights up. And then as you're moving your way back up to the front of the bus, you want to bang on your roof hatch. Then you want to open up your side emergency exits.
rear door open.
If for whatever reason they don't open, contact the workshop.
Warning, rear door open. Warning, rear door open. Warning, rear door opened.
Stow your empty sign somewhere in the front where you won't forget it. And then you want to move outside the bus and check the lights. So here I'm checking for any lights that might be out, parking lights, turn signals, high beams, low beams, and of course our 8-ways, and then also our clearance lights. So then I'm going to check the tire, make sure it's in good condition, make sure it's got at least 4/32 of an inch of tread, and I also want to make sure that it's not retreaded or regrooved. And if there's any sort of damage to the tire, report it immediately to the workshop. Check your leaf springs, make sure they're not cracked. Check your wheel, make sure it's not corroded, dented, or welded. Brakes, make sure they're in good condition. Lug nuts, make sure they're not showing any signs of rust. If they are, they're leaking. And your hub seal, make sure it's not leaking any oil. Okay, make sure your crossing gate does what it should. This is an air-operated crossing gate. All right, bang on the tire, make sure it's got air, make sure it's got at least 4/32 of an inch remaining of tread. Make sure the tire is not retreaded or regrooved. And then you want to make sure the tire itself is in good condition. Check your wheel, make sure it's not corroded, dented, or welded. Check your brakes, make sure they're in good condition. Check your lug nuts, make sure they're not leaking. If they're showing signs of rust, then they're leaking. And then make sure the hub seal is not leaking any oil. And of course, check your leaf springs, make sure they're not cracked. Under the hood, you want to check your filter, hoses, wiring, washer fluid level, frame, alternator, belts, engine, make sure it's in good condition. Check your thermal fan and then your radiator and your intake. Check your hoses and wiring on this side, coolant level. If there's coolant showing in the view window, then you've got a good enough level of coolant. If there is no coolant showing in this line, you need to add some coolant. Power steering fluid. Since this is an air brake bus, there's no brake fluid, so you check your lines, make sure they're not, there are no holes in them, otherwise there might be an air leak somewhere. Check the frame on this side. And then your ECU, if you have that under the hood, check that. Otherwise it might be in the fuse box. All right, moving on. I'm checking the stop arm, make sure the lights on it are working. I'm also checking the clearance lights, make sure they're turning on. I'm also checking for any broken windows. Make sure they're not cracked, broken, or missing. Lettering and numbering on the side is clearly visible. Checking the tires. Since this bus has air suspension, I'm checking the airbags. Make sure they're in good condition. Leaf springs, tires. Make sure they're in good condition. The rear tires can go all the way down to 2/32 of an inch of tread, and they can be retreaded and or regrooved. Oh, one last thing I forgot to mention. Don't forget, check your wheel. Make sure it's not corroded, dented, or welded. Check for your valve stems. Check your lug nuts. Make sure they're not showing any signs of rust trails. If there are any rust trails, then they're loose. And then you also want to check your brakes and, of course, your axle seal. Make sure the reflectors are the correct color. Alright, so now I'm checking the rear lighting, making sure everything's turning on, no bulbs are out. Checking clearance lights, 8 ways, reverse lights, brake lights, tail lights, and turn signals. And I'm also making sure that the license plate is the same as what it shows on the front and on the insurance information. Make sure the tailpipe's not sticking out more than 2 inches from the bumper. I'm also checking to make sure that the kick-out windows are not cracked, broken, or missing. Then I'm moving on to this side of the bus, checking the clearance lights, making sure they all turn on. I'm also making sure none of the windows are cracked, broken, or missing. Checking the tires on this side. So these can be retreaded and or regrooved. They can go down to 2/32 of an inch of tread. And then we have the wheel here. Make sure they're not corroded, dented, or welded. Check your valve stems. Check your brakes, lug nuts. Make sure they're not showing any signs of rust. And your axle seal. And don't forget, check your airbag if so equipped. This bus has air suspension, so the airbag is in good condition. And then your leaf springs. Check your lettering, numbering. Continue to check the lights as you're moving back to the front of the bus. Then go back inside the bus. And then check your child checkmate.
Please conduct your child search now. Child checkmate is now deactivated.
Press the button. Make sure it does what it should. Then come back up to the front. And we're going to perform a safe start. So first things first, we're going to check our neutral safety switch and make sure that the bus does not start in gear. So we're going to go ahead, grab the gear lever, make sure it goes fluidly through the gears, pick a gear, then try to start it. Put my foot on the brake. In this case, our neutral safety switch is working, so we're good there. To perform a safe start, what you need to do is first make sure the parking brake is fully applied. Then make sure the transmission is in park, if so equipped, otherwise neutral. We do not have park on this bus, so we make sure it's in neutral. Then turn the key to the run position. Don't start it yet. You want to make sure the ABS light goes out and the wait to start light goes out. If both of those lights are out, you may go ahead, put your foot on the brake, and then turn the key to the start position. Release as soon as the engine starts. So now, because this is an air brake bus, we're going to check our governor cut in and cut out. Release the parking brake, and then fan the brakes down till 105 psi. At this point, the governor should kick in automatically and build that pressure back up. Once you hear the governor cut out, go ahead and set the parking brake and turn the engine back off. Then turn the key to the run position. Don't start the engine. And what you want to do is once again release the parking brake. This is your S in sail. So S meaning your static test. You want to release your parking brake, let the gauges settle, and then time for 1 minute. Make sure you don't lose more than 2 psi in a minute. All right, 1 minute starting now. All right, 1 minute has elapsed. We did not lose more than 2 psi in a minute. Next is the A in sail, which is applied. Put your foot on the brake and hold for a minute. But first, you want to make sure the gauges stabilize before starting to count for a minute. You can count to 60 or you can use a stopwatch, whatever you need to do. Does not matter. As long as you can count for a minute, that's all that matters. So, don't want to lose more than 3 psi in a minute. 1 minute starting now. All right, 1 minute has elapsed, and we did not lose more than 3 psi in a minute. Next is the L, which is low air warning, and this can be one or more of 3 different items. It can be a low air warning light, a low air buzzer, and a wigwag. This bus does not have a wigwag, but it has the low air warning light as well as a low air buzzer. So we're going to fan the brakes slowly but deeply. We want to make sure that the low air buzzer comes on at no less than 60 psi. Our low air buzzer came on, and it's at 60 psi. So now we're going to continue to fan the brakes down until the parking brake pops out. That's our E in SAIL, emergency pop out. That should happen anywhere between 20 and 45 psi and no less than 20 psi, or it is an out of service violation. Alright, parking brake has popped out. And we have just about 20 psi remaining. So now, go ahead and put your foot on the brake. Safe start. Then, if you want to, you can activate your fast idle. Help build that pressure up. You also want to make sure that you don't hear any unusual noises whenever you start your engine. The low air buzzer went out at around 72 psi. However, that does not mean it is safe to move the bus yet. You want to make sure you have at least 90 psi before you attempt to move the bus. In this case, we're going to let it build back up to 125 psi when the governor cutout normally happens before we do our service brake test and our parking brake test. We got to do the parking brake test and then service brake test. Alright, turn off the fast idle. So now we're going to check our parking brake. We're going to put it in first gear and then give it 1200 RPMs for 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now before we start to drive, we're going to turn our lights on for safety. Shift back to neutral real quick. Check our turn signals. High beams. Four ways. And then put it in reverse. Check your reverse alarm. It's not working on this bus. So now we're going to do our service brake test. Put it in gear. Release the parking brake. And then pull forward. And then you want to get up to 5 miles an hour and then apply your service brake 2 times. Alright, service brakes are working good. So if you're ready to drive, keep driving. Otherwise, secure the bus. Pull your parking brake out, put it in neutral, or park if so equipped. Alright, so a few other things you want to check are your wipers. Check them on low, check them on high. Push in for your wiper fluid. It's not working on this bus, but you do want to check that. And if it's not working, go to the workshop. Check your safety sticker. Make sure the mileage shown on the odometer is less than what is shown on the sticker. In addition, you want to make sure that the date shown on the sticker is not past the calendar month that you're currently in. So right now it's April. It's not due until October, so we're good to go there. When you're checking your gauges, you want to make sure your idle is anywhere from 700 to 800 RPMs. That's the normal operating idle range. Make sure your coolant temperature is no higher than 200 degrees. Operating range is 185 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's higher than that, call it in. Oil pressure, make sure it does not dip below 20. If it does, call it in. Operating range is usually 40 to 60 psi, and that's while you're driving. But when your engine's fully warmed up, it should be closer to 25 psi. Transmission temperature, operating range 185 to 200 degrees. If it's higher than that, call it in. Air pressure. So if your governor does not cut out, you have a safety valve that will pop open at 150 psi. If that happens, call it in, bring it to the workshop as soon as you can. Make sure you have no less than a half a tank of diesel, or 3/4 in the winter. So half a tank in the summer, 3/4 in the winter. And you want to make sure that your battery voltage is in the blue. If it's in the yellow, call it in. Operating range is 12 to 15 volts, but usually 13.5 is the golden standard while it's running. And then lastly, you want to make sure your speedometer is showing 0 while it's parked. And then when you're done, turn the bus off.
Please conduct your child search now.
Go to the back with your empty sign, hang it up, and then press the child checkmate deactivate button. Don't forget to actually search for sleeping students.
Now deactivated.
And then you'll want to cycle the ignition off and then back on to put it into charter mode. This is so that nobody triggers the alarm.
Charter mode has been activated.
And then one last thing I want to mention is because this is an air brake bus, you want to check for your tank drain and then just pull on it. You don't have to drain it completely, just pull on it. This makes sure that there's no excessive water buildup in the air tank. And then I forgot to mention, when you're doing your pre-trip, you want to make sure that you have your muffler. In this case, it's your DPF. You want to make sure there's no holes in the tailpipe, and you want to make sure there's no excessive rust on the drive shaft or the frame, and your air tanks, since this is an air brake bus. Before this video ends, I just wanted to point out, you also want to check your mirrors, make sure they're secured in place, make sure none of them are cracked, broken, or missing, and then make sure there are no dangling or loose wires for the heated mirror section of the mirrors. So these are your outside mirrors. Now your inside mirror you check during the first part of the pre-trip. I've already checked that. Also, I wanted to mention that the sonar on this bus was not working as shown earlier in the video. In that case, you just do a paper pre-trip and then call it into dispatch so that way they know what's going on. And then the side emergency exits on the right side were not opening. That has been reported. And lastly, the gear shifter was not going into the first range, even though it would move all the way down into the first range. For some reason, the cable just isn't pulling on it strong enough to put it into first gear. So it only goes reverse, neutral, drive, fourth, and second. That problem has been reported to the workshop. Couple more things I wanted to mention. After your emergency pop out has occurred, when you're building your air pressure back up, you want to make sure that your air pressure goes from 85 to 100 psi within 45 seconds at normal idle. So that's 5 psi every 15 seconds at the bare minimum. Because this is an air brake bus, you want to make sure that your pre-trip is no less than 8 minutes. And if your air brake bus happens to have a wheelchair lift, add 2 more minutes onto that. So no less than 10 minutes on an air brake bus with a wheelchair lift. And last but certainly not least, if you have any problems at all with your bus, just go to the workshop. A technician will diagnose your problems and then they will tell you to either park your bus, say for instance they need to order parts and fix it a different day, or they will down your bus, whether it be for a couple of hours, so that way you'll have it back for your afternoon routes, for example, or for a day or more, in which case you'll just be given a different bus and you'll have to pre-trip another bus for your afternoon routes. Hope this helps you guys understand how you should be doing your pre-trip on a bus that has air brakes.